The twin suns of Ryzik Prime burned high above the arena, casting long shadows across the red stone floor. Thousands of alien spectators roared with excitement, their voices echoing through the massive stadium. Warriors from across the galaxy had gathered here to prove their strength. This place was sacred to many. Fights were not just for sport, they were for honor. Among the crowd, all eyes turned to the next match. The announcer's voice boomed, entering from Sector 9, the human, Callan of Terra. There was a moment of silence. Then laughter followed. A single human, against the warriors of Ryzik Prime. Callan stepped into the arena wearing armor that looked nothing like the flashy, high-tech suits of the others. His armor was plain gray, smooth, and without spikes or glowing energy. It didn't shine or hum. To most aliens watching, it looked weak, like it belonged to a miner, not a fighter. On the other side of the arena stood Syraxa, a tall and powerful female warrior from the Valari species. Her skin shimmered like molten bronze, and her muscles flexed beneath thick black armor. In her hand, she held a blade forged from Starcore metal, a weapon said to cut through nearly anything. She was a champion here, respected, feared, and proud. When she saw Callan, Syraxa burst out laughing. "That's your armor," she called out, her voice loud and clear. "Did you build it from kitchen scraps, human?" The crowd laughed harder. Even the judges seemed amused. But Callan didn't react. He simply adjusted the strap on his shoulder, looked up at her with calm eyes, and waited. The bell rang. The duel had begun. Syraxa didn't waste time. She rushed forward with incredible speed. Her long legs crossed the arena in seconds, her blade raised high. The crowd rose to their feet, ready to see Callan get knocked out in one swing. But what happened next stunned everyone. Syraxa brought her sword down hard onto Callan's chest plate. A loud clang rang out, but not the one they expected. Her sword didn't slice through his armor. Instead, it bent. The mighty Starcore blade curved like rubber around Callan's chest. Sparks flew. Syraxa stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at her weapon, then at him. "What?" she breathed. The crowd fell silent. Callan stood still, untouched. Not even a scratch on his armor. Slowly, he raised his hand and pushed her bent blade aside. "Are we done?" he asked quietly. Gasps spread across the stadium. The judges whispered among themselves. The announcer didn't know what to say. No one had ever seen something like this before. Syraxa gritted her teeth. "What trick is this?" she growled. "No trick," Callan replied. "Just design." She looked at him closely now. This human, small compared to her, did not look afraid. He wasn't even sweating. His armor, though simple in appearance, had taken a direct hit from one of the strongest blades in the galaxy and hadn't broken. Syraxa stepped back and raised her hand. "Match pause," she shouted. The announcer nodded. Match paused for equipment check. Engineers and analysts ran onto the field. They scanned the bent blade, then tried scanning Callan's armor. Their scanners blinked and gave no useful data. The material wasn't in their databases. They looked confused. "This can't be right," one of them whispered. "It's absorbing the energy of the strike, spreading it across the surface." "Is it organic?" another asked. "Or some kind of soft metal?" "No, it's engineered," the first replied. "But not by any tech we know." Syraxa crossed her arms and looked at Callan again. "What planet did you say you were from?" "Earth," he said simply. "I thought your people were weak," she said. He smiled slightly. "We've never been the strongest, but we're good at surviving, at adapting." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Interesting." The crowd, once laughing, now murmured in confusion and curiosity. "Should we continue?" the announcer asked. Syraxa looked at her bent blade, then at Callan's unbroken armor. "No," she said at last. "Not today." The bell rang again. Match ended. No winner, no loser, just a mystery. As Callan walked out of the arena, the whispers followed him. Who is that human? What is that armor? Could he be dangerous? But Callan didn't look back. He had made his point, and this was only the beginning. The next morning, the news about the arena match spread across Rhysic Prime like wildfire. Every news screen replayed the moment when Syrax's legendary blade bent like a toy against the human's armor. Journalists called it the strike that changed everything. Scientists, soldiers, and even royal advisors were now curious about one thing. What was that human wearing? Callan sat quietly in the corner of a metallic room, sipping water. He was inside the guest, orders provided to off-world challengers. His armor rested beside him on a table, dull, gray, and simple to the eye, yet suddenly the most talked-about item on the planet. He knew this attention wouldn't last long. Soon, someone would challenge him again, this time harder, maybe even with weapons meant to kill. But for now, he had a few moments of peace. The door slid open with a hiss. Syraxa stepped in. Callan looked up but didn't stand. Didn't expect a visit from you. She crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. I didn't come to fight. That's a surprise, he said calmly. Syraxa studied him. She wore no armor now, just a dark training suit, her hair tied back, face sharp and unreadable. I've never seen armor do what yours did. I hit it with full strength. That blade has cut through warships. And yet, Callan said, tapping the edge of his cup, it didn't cut through me. Why? She asked, more serious now. Callan thought for a second. Then he pointed to his armor. It's not about being harder. It's about being smarter. That doesn't explain anything, she frowned. It's Earth-made, built by people who lose often but never stop trying. We don't have your strength or speed, so we build things differently. My armor doesn't resist energy. It absorbs it, redirects the force. Syraxa narrowed her eyes. Like a shockwave sponge. Sort of. Callan nodded. But better. There was silence between them for a moment. I want to test it again, she said finally. You want to fight? Callan raised an eyebrow. No audience this time, she replied. Just you and me. I need to understand what I faced yesterday. Callan stood up and picked up his armor. All right. But no weapons strong enough to blow up buildings, okay? A small smile touched her lips. Deal. They met later in a private training hall beneath the arena. No cameras, no judges, just stone floors and wide space. Callan wore his armor again, and Syraxa carried a different weapon. A heavy staff made of dense crystal metal, meant to crush rather than cut. She attacked fast, and he blocked. The sound of her strikes echoed through the chamber. Her staff slammed into his shoulder, then his side, then his back. But every time, the force melted into the armor and was spread out. Callan didn't even fall. How? She growled, sweat on her brow. Even pressure armor gets dented after this. You're used to armor that fights force with more force, Callan explained between dodges. But humans learned something else. Pressure breaks pressure, but flexibility bends and returns. She stopped swinging. Breathing heavily, she dropped her staff and stepped back. So you're not just wearing tech. You're wearing philosophy. Callan smiled. Something like that. Syraxa looked at him, her face now thoughtful. You don't fight to win in one blow. You fight to last longer. That's usually how humans survive, Callan replied. We hold on, even when everything says we shouldn't. She nodded slowly, clearly impressed now. But then the door to the training hall suddenly opened. A group of high-ranking officers from the Rhysic military walked in, their expressions serious. Human, one of them said. You are requested by the Science Council. Immediately. Callan didn't flinch. Let me guess. They want my armor. They want to understand it. Study it. Possibly replicate it. The officer said. You may keep your life. But we must know what makes it so special. Callan stepped forward slowly. And if I say no? The officer's tone sharpened. Then you will be taken. Before things could escalate, Siraxa raised her hand. He's under my protection. You'll not lay a hand on him. The officers exchanged confused glances. You fought him in the arena. And now I respect him, she replied firmly. This human has shown us something new. He deserves better than threats. Callan looked at her in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to stand up for him, especially not her. The lead officer frowned. Then let him come with us willingly, or we report to the High Council. I'll go, Callan said suddenly. But only to talk, not to hand over anything. They nodded, and the group left. Siraxa turned to him. That was brave, but also risky. Callan shrugged. Story of my species. As he followed the officers, he looked back once. Siraxa gave a short nod. It wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something new. Respect, curiosity, and maybe a strange alliance forming in the shadows of the arena where once she had laughed at his armor. Callan sat in the center of a wide, circular room made of silver metal. Bright lights shone down from the ceiling, and a group of alien scientists stood around him, each holding strange tools. Behind a glass wall, high-ranking officials from the Rhysic Science Council watched closely. They didn't trust him, but they were very curious. His armor rested on a display table beside him. Even now, it looked plain. No lights, no strange patterns, no marks of power. But that was what made it so mysterious. One of the scientists, a thin creature with 4 arms and glowing yellow eyes, stepped forward. We mean no harm, human. We only wish to study your armor. Just tell us the composition of the metal. Callan leaned back calmly. You can scan it if you want. I won't stop you, but it's not about just the metal. The scientist blinked. Then explain. Callan glanced at the armor. Earth's science isn't just about strength. We work with what we have. Sometimes what we have isn't very much. So we learn to create something better from less. Another scientist, taller and with crystal horns, spoke up. We tried scanning your armor. The results make no sense. It behaves like a solid and a fluid. It absorbs energy, then spreads it out instantly. That's correct, Callan nodded. It's made with nanotech, tiny machines, smaller than cells, working together. Each one reacts to impact in real time. They bend, they flex, they protect. Whispers filled the room. The alien scientists hadn't seen anything like this before. But how do you power it? One asked. We see no energy source. It doesn't need one, Callan replied. Each nanobot has a tiny energy cell. They share energy between them. It recharges through motion, heat, and even light. An older official behind a glass wall looked confused. This level of technology shouldn't exist on a planet as young as Earth. Callan smiled slightly. Maybe that's because you judge us by your rules. There was silence for a moment. Then a door opened and someone new entered the room. Siraxa. The scientists moved aside as she walked toward Callan. She was not in armor, but her presence still felt strong. Her eyes scanned the armor, then rested on Callan. They don't understand how humans work, she said simply. Few do, Callan replied. Siraxa looked at the council members. You wanted to test him. You did. And he passed. Now you want to take his knowledge for yourselves. One of the officials responded coldly. We have the right to study anything that challenges the balance of power. He didn't challenge it with weapons, Siraxa replied. He challenged it with ideas. Another scientist spoke, this time with respect. His armor is not just a tool. It is a symbol of something more. Creativity, problem-solving, a new way of thinking. Callan looked around the room. Humans are not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the smartest, but we're stubborn. We keep trying. We don't stop just because something seems impossible. One of the younger researchers leaned closer to the armor. Could this technology be shared? Could it help protect lives? Callan nodded slowly. That depends. Will you use it to protect or to control? The room fell silent again. A voice from the council room finally answered. We don't know yet. Callan stood. Then I won't hand it over. Not until you do. Just then, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. Everyone turned toward the control screen. Intruders, DETCTED, Southgate BRECGD. The voice of a security officer shouted through the speaker. Armed group entering the facility. They are targeting the human. Sirex's eyes narrowed. They're not here for science. They're here to take you by force. Callan quickly picked up his armor and began putting it on. Told you this would happen. One of the scientists asked, why would someone attack now? Callan fastened his chest plate. Because they're afraid. When something new shows up, people panic. Some want to destroy it before they understand it. Sirexa pulled a staff from the wall. Then let's show them you're not easy to take. She stood by his side, ready to defend. Outside, the intruders broke into the hallway, fully armed and wearing military-grade suits. But they weren't official soldiers. They were mercenaries. Someone had hired them quietly. Inside the lab, Callan tightened his gloves and looked at the council members. You wanted to know what my armor can do. He smiled slightly. Now you'll see it in action. Heavy footsteps echoed through the long metallic hallway. The red emergency lights flashed above, painting the walls in mourning. The mercenaries moved quickly, weapons ready. Their orders were clear: capture the human alive and take his armor by any means necessary. Inside the research room, Callan tightened the final piece of his armor. The gray suit locked into place with a soft hiss. It still looked simple, but now everyone in the room knew better. Behind him, Sirexa stood ready, holding a solid staff in both hands. She had no armor, but she didn't need it. They're almost here, one of the scientists said nervously. The security doors won't hold for long. Sirexa didn't wait. We move now. She stepped forward and slammed her fist into the wall panel. A hidden side door hissed open. This leads to the maintenance tunnels. We'll lose them in there. Callan looked at the scientists. You coming? They hesitated, unsure. Hadraxa glanced over her shoulder. Stay if you like, but don't expect mercy from mercenaries. That was enough. The group followed her into the narrow tunnel. Inside, the air was cooler. Pipes lined the ceiling, and the metal floor rattled under their feet. They moved fast, the sound of explosions far behind them. Callan spoke as they ran. Someone planned this. They knew I'd be here. It's not just you, Karaxa said. It's what you represent now. Change. Callan glanced at her. And you. You were my enemy yesterday. She gave him a sharp look. I still don't understand humans, but I respect what I saw. That armor didn't just block my strike. It taught me something. Callan raised an eyebrow. Taught you what? They stopped at a corner. Ahead, the tunnel split into two paths. Which way? Asked a scientist. Sirexa didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Callan. This is your technology. Your fight. Lead. Callan nodded and took the left path. This way. Behind them, the sound of boots returned. Closer now. They picked up speed. After a few turns, they reached a dead end with a service ladder leading up. Callan climbed first, then helped the others. At the top was a storage room filled with old crates and machine parts. Let's rest here, Sirexa said, shutting the hatch behind her. Everyone breathed heavily. Callan sat against a crate and removed his helmet. Sirexa stood nearby, watching him. Why did you really agree to fight me? Callan asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because I wanted to prove something, that I was stronger than any outsider. And now I want to understand you. she admitted. Callan blinked. He didn't expect her to say that. You fight differently, she continued. You don't rely on power. You rely on thinking. Strategy. I've never seen that before in real combat. Callan gave a small smile. Humans had to fight like that. For most of our history, we were weaker than the things trying to eat us. Ziraxa tilted her head. Eat you. Long story, he chuckled. But the point is, we had to outsmart our enemies. That's where all this, he pointed at his armor, comes from. She stepped closer. Then show me. Show you what? Show me how you think, she said. Let me fight by your side. Learn your way. Callan looked at her with surprise. You want to learn from a human. I already lost once, she said. But I'm not ashamed of learning from someone better at something. He nodded slowly. All right then. But you should know, humans don't give up easily. We fight with everything we've got, even when the odds are against us. Ziraxa smiled. Good. I wouldn't want it any other way. Suddenly, the wall behind them shook. A blast blew open part of the door, and mercenaries stormed in. Move, Callan shouted, pulling his helmet back on. Ziraxa rushed forward, staff spinning. She knocked one enemy to the ground and disarmed another. Callan used his armor's built-in shock absorber to leap over a group, landing hard but unharmed. He grabbed a metal rod and swung it with precision, striking just enough to knock his enemies out without killing them. Together, they moved like a perfect team. Ziraxa with strength and speed, Callan with clever moves and perfect timing. The mercenaries didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, the room was clear. Callan looked at her, breathing hard. That felt different. Ziraxa grinned. You think I hit works well together? He laughed. Yeah, I guess it does. Outside, more chaos was coming. But inside that moment, something had changed. Not just between two fighters, but between two worlds. For the first time in her life, Ziraxa didn't want to crush a human. She wanted to understand one. The sounds of footsteps and distant alarms echoed through the maintenance tunnels as Callan, Ziraxa, and the scientists quickly made their way through the cramped corridors. They had just finished dealing with the mercenaries, but more enemies were closing in on their position. This wasn't over. The mercenaries had only been a distraction. There was something much bigger going on, something they didn't yet understand. I don't like the silence, Callan muttered as he led the group forward. Ziraxa's sharp eyes scanned the tunnels. They figured out we've escaped. We don't have much time. They moved as fast as they could, but the walls seemed to close in around them. Callan felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had thought he could handle the mercenaries. But now, it was clear, this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone. They reached a large door at the end of the tunnel, and Ziraxa took the lead. She slammed her hand against the control panel, and the door opened with a loud hiss. On the other side was an underground hangar, filled with ships and military equipment. But there was one thing that caught their attention immediately. A ship. It was sleek, dark, and powerful looking. The markings on its hull were unfamiliar, but the technology felt advanced. Too advanced for this place. Something didn't sit right. Is that your ship? Ziraxa asked, eyeing it carefully. Callan shook his head. No, but whoever owns that ship is going to be a problem. Then we need to leave, one of the scientists said, his voice panicked. They'll track us. We're too exposed here. Callan nodded, but before he could suggest a plan, a voice rang out from behind them. Leaving so soon? The group turned, startled. Out of the shadows stepped a tall figure, his eyes hidden behind a visor. His armor was unlike anything they had seen before, sleek, silver, and perfectly formed. He was not one of the mercenaries. He was different. I'm afraid you won't be leaving at all, the figure said coldly. Not with that armor. Callan instinctively took a step forward, his hand resting on the side of his weapon. He had no intention of running. But the figure raised his hand, and from behind him, more soldiers emerged from the shadows. "Who are you?" Syraxa demanded, her voice steady but dangerous. "I'm the one who will ensure that human technology doesn't disrupt the balance of power here," the figure replied, stepping closer. "My name is Varrock, and I'm here to stop you." Syraxa's muscles tensed, but Callan stepped between them, his eyes locked on Varrock's visor. "You're with the council, aren't you?" he asked. Varrock's lips twisted into a smile. "Not exactly. I'm a contractor, a neutral party, but I've been hired to make sure that your little discovery doesn't spread." Callan's heart sank. "You want to control this technology?" "Control?" Varrock's voice was low, almost mocking. "No, I want to destroy it. No one should have the power to protect themselves like this. It's dangerous." Syraxa stepped forward, her face hard. "If anyone is going to control this technology, it will be the Ryzik, not you." Varrock's laugh echoed in the hangar. "You think you can stop me?" He motioned to the soldiers behind him. "I've already been paid. You're too late." Callan tightened his grip on his weapon. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about keeping his people safe. He couldn't let Varrock, or anyone, take this technology away from humanity. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion as the hangar door slammed open. The shockwave threw everyone off balance. Smoke filled the room, and shouts of surprise filled the air. The mercenaries from earlier had arrived, but they weren't alone. A new group of soldiers had entered with them, their uniforms marked with the same strange symbol as Varrock's. This wasn't a fight between two factions anymore. This was a battle for control of Earth's most valuable technology. And it was all happening right here, in this underground hangar. "We need to get out of here," Callan shouted over the chaos. "Now." Syraxa turned to him. "The ship." Callan nodded. "If we can reach that ship, we might have a chance." With weapons drawn, they made a dash toward the dark ship. Callan could feel the pressure mounting. Every step he took felt like a countdown. They were close, but Varrock and his soldiers weren't giving up easily. The mercenaries were now fighting among themselves, trying to grab control of the hangar. As they neared the ship, a loud crack of gunfire rang out. One of the soldiers in Varrock's group took a shot at Syraxa, and she staggered. "No," Callan shouted, rushing to her side. Syraxa grunted, shaking her head. "I'm fine," she said, but her eyes were hard, determined. "We can't stop now." Callan helped her up, and they ran for the ship. The moment they boarded, the hatch slammed shut behind them, and the engines roared to life. Callan took the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. He had no idea how to fly a ship like this, but he wasn't about to give up now. "Strap in," he shouted. Syraxa sat beside him, her hand gripping the console. The ship lurched forward, and they shot out of the hangar, bursting into the air and away from the chaos below. The sound of the battle below them faded, but the tension in the air didn't. "We've got a target on our backs," Syraxa said, looking out the window at the growing clouds behind them. "This won't be over until we figure out who's really behind all this." Callan nodded, his eyes fixed on the sky ahead. "And I'll make sure we do." The ship soared through the dark skies above Ryzik Prime, far beyond the reach of the city's walls. Below, the chaos of the hangar was quickly left behind, but the problems were far from over. Callan kept his hand steady on the controls, even though his mind raced. He had no idea who Varrock was, but the mercenaries and soldiers chasing them weren't just after the technology in his armor. They were after everything it represented. Beside him, Syraxa gripped the seat with white knuckles. Her eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, but her mind was clearly working. The fight they had just escaped from was only a small part of a much larger picture. Someone had organized this attack, and it wasn't just for the armor. It was for control over something bigger. "We need to find out who's pulling the strings," Syraxa said, her voice low but filled with determination. Callan nodded. "I agree, but we need to lay low first. We can't outrun them forever, especially with that ship tracking us. Siraxa glanced at him. You think they'll catch us? I'm betting they will, he replied. We're not the only ones with powerful tech. Whoever sent Varrock has a lot of resources. We'll need help. Help? Siraxa raised an eyebrow. From who? The Ryzik military. Not them, Callan said, shaking his head. We need someone who understands this kind of fight. Someone who's used to being underestimated. Someone like a human, she asked with a knowing smile. Callan smirked. Exactly. A human who isn't afraid to think differently. Siraxa was quiet for a moment, looking at him with an almost new understanding. You're saying we need to turn the tables. Fight back not with strength, but with something else. Exactly. We've got to outsmart them, Callan said, his eyes narrowing as the stars ahead blurred by the speed of the ship. They want control, right? Let's make them lose it. She nodded slowly. I like that idea. But first, we need a place to hide. Callan scanned the ship's radar. I have a few contacts back home. But we'll have to go deep into space. Somewhere no one will look. Siraxa looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. You expect me to follow you into a wild goose chase across the stars. I expect you to trust me, Callan replied. We're not chasing anything. We're going to a place where they can't touch us, and then we'll turn this around. The silence between them stretched for a moment. Siraxa wasn't sure if she fully understood him. She had always relied on strength and force to solve her problems. But now she was starting to see that maybe there was another way, one that didn't require smashing things with sheer power. We need to move quickly, Callan added, breaking the silence. We've only got a small window before they track us down. Siraxa turned and began helping him adjust the ship's course. She could see the seriousness in his eyes. The stakes were high, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect his people. But was he willing to risk everything to keep his promise? You know, you're not like any human I've ever met, Siraxa said, adjusting a few controls as the ship sped faster. You're stubborn, smart, and you have a way of making people listen. I still don't fully trust you, but I'm starting to understand why they might. Callan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the ship's navigation system. They had only one shot at making this work. I've been underestimated my whole life, he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. Humans don't always have the strongest weapons or the most powerful allies, but we've learned how to survive, how to fight with what we have, and how to win when no one expects us to. Siraxa glanced at him, impressed. That's what makes you dangerous. He chuckled softly. I'm just a guy with an armor suit. It's the people who follow me that make the difference. Siraxa nodded, her gaze turning to the vastness of space ahead. She had seen many warriors, many heroes, but none quite like Callan. He was something different, and though she still didn't fully trust humans, she couldn't ignore the power in his words. As the ship sped toward the unknown reaches of space, the two of them worked in silence, their minds focused on the challenge ahead. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. Back on Ryzik Prime, Varrock and his mercenaries were already preparing for their next move. They had lost this round, but they weren't giving up, and neither would Callan. Hours later, they arrived at their destination, a small hidden base on a barren moon in a distant sector. No one would look here. It was the perfect place to regroup and plan their next steps. The ship landed softly, and the hatch opened with a quiet hiss. Callan and Siraxa stepped out, the cold air of the barren moon hitting their faces. They could see the base in the distance, a series of small structures built into the moon's rocky surface. This place is isolated, Siraxa commented, her voice echoing slightly in the cold silence. Are you sure it's safe? Callan nodded. It's the only place I trust, and we need to plan. Once we have a strategy, we can start gathering the pieces we need to fight back. Gather the pieces, she asked. What do you mean? I'm going to make sure no one can threaten humanity again, Callan said firmly. And that means showing them that no matter how powerful they think they are, humans can always find a way to win. Syraxa smiled slightly. Well then, let's make sure we win this fight. The barren moon stood silent and cold as Callan and Syraxa made their way into the hidden base. The air was thin, and the dark sky above seemed endless, filled with stars that felt so far away. Yet within this isolated place, the two of them found a temporary peace. No mercenaries, no trackers, just time to think, plan, and gather the strength they would need for what was coming next. Inside the base, the few humans Callan trusted were already waiting. They had set up a small command center in one of the base's rooms, with equipment and maps spread out on every surface. Callan was relieved to see that everyone was accounted for. Scientists, engineers, and a few soldiers who had survived the chaos on Rhysic Prime. But now, the real challenge was beginning. We don't have much time, Callan said as he stood before the group, his eyes scanning the room. Varrock and whoever else is behind this will be looking for us soon. We need to strike before they can regroup. Syraxa stood by his side, her posture strong and ready. We've already seen that they're not afraid to go to extreme lengths to control this technology. We can't afford to be passive anymore. A few of the engineers and soldiers nodded, clearly energized by Syraxa's words. Callan looked around the room at the people who had chosen to stand with him. He knew what they had risked to come here, to follow him into the unknown. We've got one advantage, Callan continued, his voice firm. They underestimated us because we're human. They think we don't stand a chance against their armies and their technology. But that's where they're wrong. We've got something they don't, creativity. And when we put our minds together, we can outsmart them. One of the scientists raised his hand. But how do we start? We're not exactly equipped for a full-scale battle. Callan smiled slightly. We don't need to. What we need is to cripple their supply lines, disrupt their communication, and create confusion. We make them react, not act. When they're reacting, they're losing. Syraxa stepped forward. We'll hit their weak points. We'll show them that even without massive armies, we can win. We don't need to match them in firepower. We just need to outthink them. The soldiers in the room stood straighter, clearly ready to follow her lead. Callan could see the change in Syraxa. The warrior who had once mocked him was now a leader, a partner in the fight, someone who understood the value of what he brought to the table. We're going to need supplies, Callan added. Weapons, intel, anything we can use to our advantage. And I know just the place to get them. Syraxa raised an eyebrow. Where? Callan paused for a moment. There's an old contact I have. Someone who owes me a favor. We'll need to go off the grid for this. No signals, no attention. Syraxa nodded. Sounds like a plan. But we'll need a team to move fast and quiet. I'll take care of the logistics, Callan said, motioning to the team of engineers in the corner. You focus on the strategy. Once we have the supplies, we hit their communications first, cut them off from the rest of their forces. Then we make our move. The group began to break up, everyone getting to work on their respective tasks. Callan sat down in front of a terminal, working through the details of their plan. His thoughts raced, but for the first time in a long while, he felt confident. Syraxa approached him after a few minutes. You really believe this will work? Callan looked up at her, his eyes steady. Yes, I do. I know how to fight this fight, and we're going to win. But it's not just about the armor or the tech. It's about the people, the ones who believe in this. Syraxa smiled, a small, genuine smile. I didn't understand that at first, but I do now. She turned to leave, but then stopped and looked back at him. You've earned my respect, Callan. You've shown me that strength doesn't always come from power. It comes from how far you're willing to go. Callan stood up, nodding. And you've earned mine. You didn't back down when things got tough. You're more than just a warrior. You're a leader. They stood there for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were no longer opponents or strangers. They were allies, and together, they were stronger than ever. Later that night, the team gathered once more, ready to put their plan into motion. The stars above seemed brighter than ever as the ship lifted off the surface of the barren moon. Callan sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers steady on the controls. Beside him, Siraxa stood, her eyes scanning the horizon. As they moved deeper into space, the quiet was almost peaceful. For the first time in days, there were no alarms, no gunfire, no threats, just the promise of what was to come. Callan looked at Siraxa. This is just the beginning. Once we strike, there's no turning back. She nodded. I'm ready. And as the ship glided toward the distant stars, Callan felt a sense of purpose like never before. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future, one where humanity's ingenuity, determination, and unity could prove stronger than any threat. Together, they would show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of.